Just want to welcome everyone this evening. I have Raja Bala and Dr. Willis joining me for the presentation portion and also the question and answer portion of this evening's webinar. And then later on, we'll bring on Mr. John Price and Mr. Josh Joy on, and they will also join in the Q&A as well to answer any questions you have regarding Winterim and also the rest of our semester. So thank you all for joining us. I hope everybody's safe and healthy. Want to begin our presentation as we have on similar ones. So we've sort of transitioned from the Bring the Penguins Home to Keep the Penguins Home task force, still continue to meet regularly, still continue to have our subgroup meetings and conversations outside of that. And as I typically do at the beginning of these, before I turn it over to Dr. Willis and Mr. Bala, a little bit of a pandemic update. As we're seeing trends continue, this is today's report from the state of Massachusetts, 986 newly reported confirmed cases. This is a slide I usually show at the beginning of these and have since May 21st when we did these webinars. And since that time, although we did a lot of webinars in the transition to spring online learning for various groups in the school that both Jen Willis and Raja Bala were part of as well as other administrators here at the school. We've also done several focused on planning for the fall beginning in May. And since that time have shown these dashboard of public health indicators from the Department of Public Health in Massachusetts. And I wanted to just to compare, because there are questions about the dimmer switch. So I thought I would start just with a little tutorial about that, what it means, why it hasn't moved very much. You know, we have allowed some privileges, which we talked about last time in the webinar in September, but not a full move of that switch and why that is, and maybe explaining that a little bit more as there seems to be some confusion surrounding that. So here's today's cases. A month ago today, 419 new cases. So you see the difference there. And then usually at the beginning of these, I'll also show these graphs of the 7-day weighted average and hospitals and surge capacity. And you can see that's certainly increasing in the first two categories. Hospitalizations are up, molecular test rate, average of positives are up, and thank goodness surge capacities are about where they've been as well as deaths, but still up from their lowest value. And then if we compare that to September 17th, certainly, right, that blue curve was going in the opposite direction. We were heading in a downward trend. We wanted to get to 2 transmission cycles before looking at that dimmer switch move. And since then, we've seen that go the other way. You know, this is the other slide I usually show, which if you look, I won't spend too much time on it, daily confirmed cases, right? So if you look at the left for where my cursor is, if you can see that, Rajan, Jen, can you see my cursor? Yeah, okay, good. 400 to 500 cases there on the left and where we are. And if you look at today, that 400, 500 is now way down here and we're continuing to climb. And this blue line is cumulative, right? So that's always gonna go up and we're hoping that it increases at a decreasing rate. But that certainly hasn't been the case. Best case, it can flatten out, which it does show. But again, this is a picture in time. So even though there were 986, I think, confirmed cases today, you'll see on the graph all the way on the right that a lot of those weren't attributed today, right? They were tests taken maybe 2, 3, whatever, 4 days ago, came back today and are attributed to that day in the past. So something else to remember is we're always looking at a snapshot in time behind us and taking all the information that we can to be able to move forward. And I really think that's what the dimmer switch is about. Actually, a lot of this about as we're making decisions related to COVID is we're collecting all these various data points, funneling them through the expertise of a medical team, through our leadership, through our team on campus, and then coming up with the best direction to move forward. So these are some of the data points we collect that I thought were important to share. And Massachusetts started every week, and today was another one released of sort of this map of, gray, which is sort of the lowest risk indicator, and red being the highest. And you can see the progression over time. If you start with my cursor is when we first did it, right? A lot of green and gray to slow, right? More yellow, more red. And then over here on the right, and then today is this one with the black background because I pulled it from the live website where it's interactive, where you can click on the town. So if you haven't seen that, it's kind of a neat tool where you can look at your area and incidents. And so Ashburnham on this map is here, where my cursor is. So to the left is the town of Winchendon, which is yellow. Down below us is green, which is Gardner, and then Leominster, Fitchburg here. So we do have some pockets around us. In the last 14 days, Ashburnham does have one case, but that isn't enough to make it a different color. So we're continuing to keep an eye on all those as well. We also monitor COVID Act Now, which is a nonprofit. You can go to COVID Act Now, I believe.org. That risk increased in Massachusetts just this last week, so sort of another collection of data points. And when you get to our dimmer switch, we started in the orange, and we've allowed some privileges here on campus after those 2 transmission cycles, as we talked about last time and had our medical team explain. But really, when you look at the explanation of the dimmer switch, it's what happens on campus and also in public health, or on campus or public health. We need to take all of those things into consideration, either or, both. And when we're looking at a state with risk increasing, and potential loosening of restrictions, which include comings and goings from those areas, that's why it hasn't moved. So, I hope there certainly wasn't confusion about that. That dimmer switch is reactive to what's happening in the world, and more specifically in our state and area. And we talked about that in the summer, but just if you missed that, or you needed a little more explanation, happy to do it. And if you want additional, again, happy to have one-on-one conversation as well. But thought it was important to combine that with our pandemic update this evening. Again, we continue to meet, as I said, as our planning committees, and tonight we'll be focused on the bottom one there, the Winterim group that Raja and Jen will be talking about. But certainly all of these pieces are still discussed. We're still advocating for how we can adjust things and make it a better experience on campus in all of these areas, and of course communications on top of all of that, to be able to do what we're doing tonight and continue our way of getting in front of messaging, of updating you, of being transparent, of talking about what we know with the data points that we are collecting to make our decisions. And as we continue to get through this semester, hopefully successfully, with only a few more weeks to go. So to that point, right, 4 to go, and you can see sort of schools happening a little bit differently, but there are fun times, there are social times, and those kids, in classroom, masks, of course, that's the reality, but there are some smiles through those masks and laughter, and we're having lots of athletic activity on campus with scrimmages and trying to get creative in weekend activities and having as much of a normal experience as possible. And as I said all along, living within and hopefully, exceeding guidelines, but with the end goals, end 3 goals, as we've said, of being able to determine if we can safely open, and then doing so, setting up a strategy to remain open, and then protecting everyone, but especially the most vulnerable among our population, which I believe we've continued to do here with 9 weeks almost down, knock on wood. You have tomorrow, right? But and then 4 to go. We talked about last time, medical team talked about the Swiss cheese model, and I thought it was a good model. And this is from Policy Lab, which is an arm of the Children's Hospital CHOPS, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which has done a lot of work around coronavirus. Dr. David Rubin, if you've read any of his material or anything that CHOPS has put out, I'd encourage you to do so. This is more from a day school model, but it does give you that visual of the, mask distancing, ventilation. I mean, we would add, or any boarding school right now would add cohorting, or what we're calling waddles, right? You might add how we're doing dining. You might add different, health center expansion, the expansive contact tracing processes we have in place, the testing that we're doing, all of those pieces in here to, again, provide an environment that meets the goals that we set out upon. So I thought that was a good graphic to share and sort of visualize if you were thinking about, because I did get a couple of questions after, not quite understanding what Dr. Muchler was talking about when he said Swiss cheese. So I wanted to share that. I thought this was a good graphic and timely, as the Policy Lab just put this out in their publication this week. So as I said, entering week 10, last week as promised, I did put out a communication about our Winterim. Given all of the data points that I just shared about COVID-19 in the state of Massachusetts and how it's predicted to continue to increase. Our medical team actually said that in the last webinar. It's posted on our website. You can go back and look at it of what their outlook was. I remember Dr. Bravo talking about sort of the fatigue of folks and the mental tiredness of continuing to sort of live in a restricted way, and then that would increase cases around this time. And she was right on, and that probably would increase as we went further. And I certainly hope that's not the case, but at the same time, want to share those data points that we have, that we're making those decisions with, and I understand that that might be hard to hear, especially after a long pandemic. It's certainly hard to share, and not something that we want to do, but at the same time, do want to act in the best interest of safety. And so in December, we will be remote, rather than leaving for, after a long fall semester and then trying to onboard a week later, being remote. And then as we thought about it, January 4th seemed like, an unrealistic time to onboard, as then we would require everyone to quarantine, as we did in the fall, right? That would happen December 20th to January 4th. And that's pretty difficult to ask, I feel, and probably even more impossible to enforce. So we pushed that date out until January 14th, asking everyone to sort of treat it like the summer. So, during the time of November 20th to January 4th, we hope you remain safe and continue safe practices. But on January 1st, begin that quarantine with close contacts and get ready for an onboard of campus, if it's safe to do so. And we will continue to monitor what cases look like, both locally and in the state, and where our students are coming from, and see if it's advisable to do so at that time. As I said, I certainly hope it is. I mean, our goal is always an in-person learning experience for as many students as possible, but we do have to balance that with the overall health and safety of the community. So we will have and I'll talk about timeline and calendar of communications at the end, as I typically do with that timeline that I share. But as late November, early December, we'll put something out about how we're going to move forward into the 2021 calendar. So with that being said, I think that's a nice introduction for the Winterim. So I will pass it over to Mr. Bala and Dr. Willis to get us going and talk about Winterim.
Thanks, Randy. I want to begin by just saying that I hope that many of you were able to connect with advisors this week, or potentially even to sit in on some classes, observe classes through Zoom on Monday. And if you were able to do that, hopefully you got a sense of all that is going well at this point. I'm especially appreciative of the opportunity to participate in this webinar at this point, for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'm really excited to be able to share details with you about what Winterim will look like. It started as an abstract idea this summer and has continued to take shape and gain momentum and excitement, and we are very eager to share that vision with you. And then also with 9 weeks under our belts at this point, we can also share a different perspective and celebrate the ways in which all of our planning has come to fruition, and again, in ways that are reassuring and validating of what we try to accomplish in terms of our approach to academics and concurrent learning. And that's really where I want to begin, namely by reviewing the priorities that we started with from the outset. And I do so hoping that that some of the through lines of the planning that happened in the summer, the experience that's being lived on campus right now, the planning around Winterim, and the ways that we see ourselves executing it become clearer and clearer during the course of tonight's presentation. So from the beginning, we've been very clear about the importance of continuity of learning. We've been working over the past 9 weeks, and will continue over the last month to build that foundation that will allow us to transition to remote learning for basically the next 3 weeks in December. And then that will allow us to pivot in any direction that's needed, as we are able to do so. I say this as a teacher with experiencing what it's like to teach on a daily basis, and on behalf of the faculty, and in full empathy with our students. And the reality is that everything right now takes longer. And because of that, everything inevitably becomes more exhaustive in ways that sort of increase on a week-to-week basis. And so we recognize the potential for that from the outset, and so we wanted to provide those release valves intentionally, and they truly have made a timely difference in terms of being able to sustain the energy and everything that's been needed to get us to this point. And that's especially important where we are right now in terms of going into the next 2 weeks, which really we'll see a ramp up before we start to ramp down during the last 2 weeks. Additionally, we have also maintained the presence of asynchronous classes and asynchronous learning. We've continued to talk about as a faculty about how to best optimize those learning experiences, again, in recognition for the upcoming transition, and knowing that there's an element of asynchronous work that will be part of Winterim. And that format or approach that was completely foreign last spring has really become a fabric of how we are approaching learning right now. And then more generally, as teachers, we've all continued to add to our toolbox while also sharpening existing tools. And that's been important in terms of being able to reach the range of students amidst the backdrop of so many unique circumstances. And it's especially true in terms of the context of the backdrop of how we've incorporated technology into our classrooms. Randy, if you go forward one, please. Similarly, this is a slide that hopefully some of you recognize from early webinars in the summer. At this point, it probably looks no less confusing, but for all of us in week 9, it actually has started to make a lot of sense. And again, the benefits of where we've been able to provide those release valves really has made a difference. But as I alluded to, as we look ahead to weeks 10 and 11, all classes will be meeting. So we're about to really enter sort of the final push before we again start to taper off a little bit in weeks 12 and 11. And most importantly, I wanted to include this visual tonight to return to that idea of continuity of learning, and to demonstrate the ways in which as these 13 weeks come to a staggered end, that's exactly where we'll be beginning again when we resume classes on November 30th. So, and here specifically there, the classes, A, B, B, C, C, D, those are exactly the classes that we will factor into the beginning of the first 3 weeks. So without further ado, we will start to talk a little bit more about Winterim. Randy, next slide. It's itself. And from the outset, I just want to begin by just being really clear about my vocabulary and some of the terms that I will be using, that Dr. Willis will be using, to make sure that what we're saying is as clear as possible. And so really there are 2 facets to the approach of Winterim that we have explored. The first is a continuation of all academic classes. So that means that every class that's currently in any student's schedule will continue to meet again in staggered fashion over the 9 weeks of Winterim. But we are also secondarily supplementing that more traditional approach with the introduction of Winterim seminars. And we will elaborate extensively on what those look like in coming minutes. But it's really those 2 components, the academic classes and the Winterim seminars, that will work in conjunction with one another to help us create a dynamic and stimulating educational experience that will set up the work that's to come the rest of the year, and especially in the spring. So again, this slide highlights things that we've talked about previously in terms of priorities. And at the forefront, again, is the continuity of learning, understanding that as students continue the work that they will continue to do in their academic classes needs to carry over and bridge the time span between now and when the spring semester formally begins. Drawing upon the lessons and successes that we had last spring, we've continued to value and prioritize a structure and a schedule that is predictable, accessible, and supported in the form of office hours that exist, and the ways in which academic support continues to meet. And this extends to the scaffolding that will allow us to find new ways to deliver on our mission, with emphasis on those defining components of curiosity, creativity, and confidence. Next slide, please, Randy. So starting with the academic classes, again, continuing on with every student's current schedule and moving into some of those nuts and bolts. Winterim itself is designed around three-week intervals. So nine weeks in total, with the first 3-week triad beginning on November 30th. And so each period, which represents an individual class, will meet for 6 out of those 9 weeks. Each week, each period will meet 3 times. 2 times will meet synchronously, and 1 time will meet asynchronously. And so again, a reminder that synchronous class meeting times are where everything is happening live and simultaneously, and then asynchronous classes are designed for students to access at times that are more convenient, or where they can really self-pace their learning within the context of a week. And the exception there, again, is academic support, which will continue to meet for each week during the 9 weeks of winter. Next slide. So as I alluded to before, this is just a quick visual of the way that the stagger plays itself out over the course of Winterim. Again, we will be picking up exactly where we're leaving off at the start of Winterim. The classes that fell out of the rotation at the end of at the last week 13 are the first ones to resume. And we wanted to maintain the staggered concept throughout the course of the winter, understanding that those same release valves that have been critical in the fall will be necessary to enable students to sustain the learning over such an extended period of time. At this point, Randy, could you go to the next slide? I want to highlight and acknowledge and really thank the volunteers, the names that you see on this list, who have spent countless hours meeting and planning all of the ins and outs that have gotten us to where we are, and really doing this on top of all of their duties and responsibilities as teachers, coaches, dorm parents. So they've really gone above and beyond because of their passion, their excitement, and their enthusiasm about the idea. And in fact, when we first put out the invitation for participation in July, so literally the heart of the summer, within hours, this group of individuals and volunteers stepped up to answer the call. And so again, we're incredibly grateful for their thoughtfulness. And at this point, I also need to acknowledge and thank Dr. Willis for her leadership. Dr. Willis is the director of teaching and learning at Cushing, and she really has been the driver behind this ship and getting us to this exciting point. So at this point, I will hand things off to her momentarily to get us a little bit further into the vision.
Thanks, Mr. Bala. I will stay on this slide just for a minute, because for me, it is just such a joy to be able to talk about the winter seminars And really, I can't kind of help but gush a bit about the names that you see. And Raja, thank you for sort of talking that through. It's just been such a pleasure to work with these folks. And as you noted, the work that they're doing, have done and continue to do is really on top of all those other roles that they play in supporting our students. And so I want to sort of echo the gratitude that you offered to the folks listed here. And sort of as we move through the slides, just know that all these folks are really represented in all the work that you'll see. So the next slide, as we kind of move forward, I'm not going to read this all to you, but do want to just note that our seminars are really grounded in a mission that our group worked on, wanted to articulate early in the fall as a way to really promote a clear direction for us, for our broader faculty, and really importantly, to align our mission around seminars with the broader school mission as we ultimately work to develop curious, creative, confident learners and leaders, which you've already sort of heard about and seen in slides tonight, but is really worth emphasizing of just the alignment that we're working to promote. The second slide is also going to be text heavy, but again, I won't read it to you. I do want to though share some of the thinking that we have, some of the communication that we've had with teachers, and really thinking about the opportunity and the challenge that we have put in front of our faculty, asking them to embrace the seminar experience. And as I'm sure everybody who's on can really appreciate, the last few months have demanded a lot from faculty. And we're looking at this Winterim experience truly as an opportunity to kind of harness the change that's happening and really work to create meaningful, memorable experiences for students. And so this component in particular was written by one of the faculty members on the Winterim committee, shared with our broader faculty as we really come together to move forward with, putting this into action. The next slide you'll see, we've talked about really two central principles that we've built the seminars around. Those are the commitment to the interdisciplinary approach, and then also the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Creating interdisciplinary seminars really just allows us to approach a topic, approach a question from multiple perspectives, really to be able to draw ideas and directions from a variety of content areas. And so in a minute, we'll look at some of the titles, but just really thinking about pulling from lots of different disciplines as we create these seminar experiences. We've also been working with faculty to really design seminars that center on diversity, that shine light on issues of equity, and that really promote an inclusive experience for our students. And so the intent is that each of these three components, we often talk about DEI kind of as a singular thing, but really we're talking about three separate things, making sure that each of those are really woven into each of the seminars that we're offering. And so I wanted to just kind of break those out for you. The next slide is sort of fun in that, students have access to the Winterim seminar catalog. And so parents, you may have had the chance to see it or hear some about it. But I've offered here just a selection of titles to give you a sense of what students are choosing from. They have actually already submitted their preferences, but just some of the titles that they were able to look over. Some are more kind of, describe themselves a little bit more clearly in the title than others. Food Fight, which is at the bottom, may not be as self-explanatory, but that's an interesting seminar that really covers topics related to botany and food. It's going to explore how food development occurs in different regions. It's going to address food access and limitations there, food culture more broadly. And students are going to work over that 6 weeks to develop a digital portfolio, and that will contain the activities and the experiences that they have in those 6 weeks, and then also ask them to really reflect and dig a little bit deeper, thinking about how city planning impacts food availability and food security, and sort of other topics all within that general idea. And so I wanted to just kind of offer a few more details about at least one of the seminars to sort of encourage you hopefully to talk with students if you haven't already and learn more about some of the seminars that are being offered. It's a fun menu, it's a fun catalog out there, so I wanted to just share some of that with you. The next slide, I believe, moves to schedule, so I'm going to bump back over to you, Raja.
So the schedule and the structure that I was alluding to, this is a visual that highlights some of it, and this is weeks 1 through 3. And so here the focus is exclusively that traditional academic experience that I was referring to. So the Winterim seminars are not beginning until January, in the second triad. And so again, all of this is by design and with a lot of thought, understanding that we're coming off of 13 weeks of a long stretch this fall, with only a relatively short break before we're asking students to dive back in, and also acknowledging that many families are potentially celebrating some of the holidays differently than in the past. And so really by design, we wanted to create an experience that felt doable. So G and F classes fall out of the rotation, with the exception of, again, of academic support. And so this is a way to keep our minds going and saturated with learning, but in ways that we hope will allow us to take that deeper dive back in after winter vacation. So you'll see in the next slide, weeks 4 through 6, hopefully that slightly longer window of time away will allow for some true recharging before we jump back into the swing of things. And at this point, in addition to the core academic classes that are returning, the seminars also begin to come into place. And one quick point of reference, this is really more for any students that are watching or any parents that have familiarity with our current schedule. Again, similar to last spring, all of our double letter classes will revert to the first letter in the grouping. So AB classes will be A, BC classes will be B, CD will become C, etc. And so by keeping some of those periods out of the rotation, not only does that provide that staggered effect, but it also allows us to carve out the additional time for the seminars to begin to be implemented. Dr. Willis?
Yeah, one of the, so as you're looking at this, one of the really important components of the seminar as we've been designing them are that students are live, that it's that we're synchronous, that we're together during that time. We're going to be in small groups. It's meant to be very interactive. And so you will see 2 seminar blocks available. So students will either be enrolled in a seminar 1 slot, which you see as that 8 a.m. slot, or they'll be in the seminar 2 slot. And so it's meant to accommodate various time zones, and students will be put into the one that's most appropriate, for them when that's a limiting factor. So you'll see those 2 90-minute class blocks, and then that 1 60-minute lab time, which is slightly different language than sometimes we're using. And so wanted to just talk a little bit about what that lab really means. And we've worked with teachers to be thinking about having that lab really move away from any content delivery. So it's not going to be sort of new information being kind of presented during that time, but rather it's meant to really be interactive, experiential, especially in those 60 minutes. So it could be something like individual feedback or conferences. It could be designed for small group work or other activities that are happening. And so that schedule time really needs to be protected for students, but it may be broken out for full groups. It may be broken out more individually. It's very much intended to be flexible and adaptable given the specific needs of whatever seminar that student is in. And so wanted to touch on those 2 specific components as we look through these 6 weeks.
So then in the last triad, weeks 7 through 9, only 2 periods drop out of rotation and the seminars continue. So this is really finishing off in full flourish right before we will again then be able to break for spring break. But I also want to point out in the visual the designated office hours that exist at times that should be generally accessible to most students. But again, there's the structure of the schedule itself allows for the flexibility for faculty and students to connect at multiple touch points throughout the week. And the same goes for for advisors. There are those 2 individual sessions, one that's specifically meant for the group, and then again, similar to some of the things that Jen was talking about, some time that's really set aside to be able to connect with advisees individually and to make sure that their support network is as firmly in place as possible as we all are sort of braving whatever form this experience is taking shape at this point. So as we sort of begin to wind down, in the next slide, we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts about grades, credits, the breakdown of the fall and spring semesters. And so the first bullet point really applies primarily to seniors, especially those who will have submitted early decision and early action applications, and then those with January admissions deadlines as well. And so the college counseling office will send out a grade report that will be composed of the grades that you are ending that first stretch with on November 20th. All students will then receive a second grade report, more like a traditional report card, at the end of Winterim, and that will have final grades and for current senior seminars, and that really so different from Winterim seminars, but seminars such as senior English seminars, some of the history and social science seminars like civil society, psychology, and then all of the visual art seminars as well. And that will allow us to begin the spring semester on March 8th, and that's when schedule adjustments will be made and new seminar signups the signups that happen will go into effect. And that was really important for us logistically and philosophically, as we were thinking on one hand about getting materials into students' hands, especially for that first 3-week stretch, but then also really wanting to have students with that transition to remote learning to be able to draw upon the expectations and familiarity of the routines and again expectations that teachers have provided in that foundation over these opening months. In the spring, there will be a formal exam period, which is likely to follow the commencement exercises for class of 2021. And then finally looking all the way ahead to final grades and transcripts, all year-long classes. And so again, year-long classes being different than some of the seminars I was describing, will receive final grades based upon an average of their fall term grade plus Winterim. That's averaged with their spring semester grades. So jumping back to the present in the next slide, this is sort of the timeline and key dates and information that everyone can look forward to over the next month. As Jen mentioned, students have already gone through their selection process for Winterim seminars, and the Winterim committee is working through those choices and taking into account the time zone logistics, and all of the final placement will be communicated to students by November 10th. For the fall term, I alluded to the exam period that will happen in the spring. For the fall, there is no formal exam period. So if a student were to have some form of a final assessment, each teacher would be building that into the final week when that individual class met. We have made the decision to have Thursday, November 19th be our final day of classes, which then allows for a full day of coordination of logistics for departure and being able to orchestrate the depopulation strategy, something that will probably look similar to the way that the arrival was coordinated in August. Student affairs will play a role in helping to coordinate those signups for departure slots, and all of the ins and outs will be communicated in the coming weeks. But the smooth way in which we were able to execute the onboarding, we're going to try to replicate that in similar fashion to make sure that we are prioritizing safe and efficient departure from campus on Thursday afternoon after the full day of classes into Friday. And then if there are international students who are coordinating flight logistics, dorms will stay open until noon on Saturday to help in that respect. And lastly, I wanted to pass along some information from the college counseling office about standardized testing and what that might look like. Again, this is information that is pretty granular and specific to seniors and possibly some juniors, but this fall, I am pleased to be on the forward side of where we're at in terms of coordinating the standardized testing that happens. But again, more gratitude to the college counseling office and many other hands that work behind the scenes, our testing coordinator, Jessica Connors. But we successfully facilitated 2 rounds of the SAT, the ACT, and then all sophomores and juniors recently took the PSAT a little over a week ago. But for those handful of seniors and possibly juniors who are still looking to get in one more round of testing in December, obviously the college counseling office and individual college counselors will be an invaluable resource in helping to determine whether or not that's advisable and to sort through some of the initial logistics. But that testing will likely need to happen at home in December. And the 2 key dates there are the November 5th deadline for SAT registration, and then the November 6th deadline for ACT registration. And just a small cautionary tale in terms of some of the logistics. And again, we were very fortunate to be able to host some of these standardized tests on campus for our students. Navigating testing off campus and finding test centers can continue to be difficult, and that's probably likely to continue to be the case as health circumstances continue to evolve. So just be ready to anticipate some of those challenges. And again, please stay in communication with your college counseling and the college counseling office as an additional resource to help. So at this point, I think, Randy, I will turn things back over to you. But again, just really on behalf of the academic office, we appreciate the opportunity to sort of get all this information out to everyone tonight.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. Just to review the timeline, as I alluded to earlier, so we starting today with our second webinar, October 22nd. And November 20th is the end of the fall semester, and just a reminder that will not be a class day, and we will communicate through our student affairs office the procedure for departure soon, but that way we can use end of the day on the 19th and some of the day on the 20th to have an organized departure from campus. Winterim will begin on November 30th, and I anticipate around that time you will also receive another letter from me regarding coming back, hopefully or not, in January, and with details of that, and also spring semester beginning in March. And we'll do another webinar December 4th to reinforce that communication, as we've done, over probably a dozen times at this point, to families, to just help that flow of communication. Sometimes it's easier to receive that information in this manner, sort of through a webinar, but also you have it in writing as well. It'll be archived on our Keep Cushing Healthy page. So there's a number of ways that you can receive that information. You can always contact any of us at any time if you need clarification, and we'll be happy to do so. I do want to leave some time for questions. I know we went a little bit long, but wanted to make sure we had that information for you. Our process of opening is continuing, and we want to stay open, as I said, and as our goals were to safely open, remain so, and protect everyone, especially the most vulnerable in our population. information. And that process is continuing and will continue to evolve. With the period of, or the indefinite period of uncertainty, things change, and then there is a lot of ambiguity that we have to live within and continue to adjust. And as the public health situation evolves, hopefully it improves, and we can change and adapt and move things in that direction. But if it doesn't, then we have to move in the other direction. And as I said at the beginning, really our decision-making process is collecting data points from where we can and moving forward in the best interest of the community. So we will continue to do so. I do want to leave some time for questions and ask Mr. Price and Mr. Doyon to join us. I see there's some already in there. And the first I think I can take in terms of the return. Isn't return 3.8? That's what we keep hearing. Now we're hearing 114. So when we communicated in the summer our return plan, certainly the fall semester period, which we're almost through now, did end at the same date that it's ending, November 20th. And then we left open that we would be hopeful that we could perhaps have an in-person experience for Winterim, but also created the Winterim to be flexible in order to react to the situation that our medical team thought would occur that is unfortunately unfolding. So that's why the Winterim was developed. That was the thought process behind it, to give us a flexible experience that could happen in person or not. And so that is why December is remote, and then January 4th we'll start remote, and hopefully we can come back the 14th. But if not, that return date could be for the spring. As I said, we'll continue to advocate for that, but given what's happening in public health, we'll have to take that into consideration as well. We did discuss leaving at Thanksgiving. Josh, do you want to maybe just give a recap on what that process is going to be like, and that parents will be receiving a communication from your office?
Yes, thank you, Randy. So in terms of departing, campus, much of what we're thinking this year is it's going to be very similar to how we repopulated campus back in August. And so, later in the next few weeks, or excuse me, not weeks, probably toward the end of next week, there will be some communication going out to both parents and students to kind of get a sense of when everyone is thinking about leaving or departing campus, and also that mode of transportation, because we ultimately realize too that some families will not be able to come to campus, as they had been back in August. And then once we are able to get a better sense of some of the needs, of our families, then we will be putting out a pick a time or a sign up genius, much like we did in the summer, to make sure that we are being scheduled. We have a process, and just to make sure that we are doing this in a safe and organized manner. Just as we kind of proceed through. And probably as you are thinking about departure of campus and wondering if it's going to be a January return or a March return, there's probably a lot of questions about things in rooms. And really what we're asking students to really think about at this point is that, as they are departing campus, is to really think about the belongings that they are going to bring home with them. Make sure that they have their essentials, make sure that they have their valuables with them, and make sure that they're going to have all of their books, and everything that they're going to really need to be successful remote learners. And if items do need to be left on campus, we are going to ask our students to box those, and they can place them in the middle of their room. And part of that thinking is much from our experience back in March, when some students were not able to return to campus. And other part of that thinking as well is that if we are in a position to repopulate our campus with all of our students, then that's something that we will explore, and think about what campus will look like a little bit more fuller.
Great, appreciate that. That was the first. Somebody had sent an email and one of the questions answered, and that was the first. And the second was, if Winterim becomes in person on or after January 14th, will students be expected to depart the campus at the end of Winterim? We'd like to stick to our schedule as much as possible. Again, anything is subject to change based on public health. We don't know what the winter is going to bring, combined with cold and flu season. So we're going to take it one step at a time, and we'll have more communication as we move forward. So look for that. Roger or Jen, question, how do minutes apply to asynchronous learning is the question.
So they are basically for Winterim, and this is continuous with what expectations have been in the fall with our approach to asynchronous classes, is that there's that they're structured around 40 minutes of time. But again, the asynchronicity of the learning experience allows students to move at their own pace, to pause, to start and stop, depending on what's potentially being asked of them to do. But each individual class is sort of structured around a 40-minute window.
Great, thank you. Will Winterim be part remote and part on campus? It looks like it goes through mid-February, and on campus will start mid-January. Again, in the letter we just sent earlier this week, we said that the December portion will be remote, and that we could either do remote or in person in the new year. But if we do in person, it would not be before January 14th, and we'll make that determination and communicate it at the end of November. Question, 8:30 a.m. is 6:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. That's significant impact on families. So do you want to talk about how we strategize to make that impact as little as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. So our starting last spring and into the fall, our expectation is that students are able to participate in all commitments, classes, advisory, whatever the activity might be, that fall between the range of 8:30 a.m. to 10 o'clock p.m. Within their local time zone. So that's an instance where, as Jen explained, the two different seminar slots that exist, an instance where we would have that flexibility to not ask a student to go to class at 6:30 in the morning in this case, unless they were really excited about that particular seminar, and then they were making that decision. But we have tried to create those opportunities, understanding that again, the temporal challenges that are very real within the entirety of our community, that spans the globe, sort of just present those logistical challenges, and we are totally understanding and reasonable about what to expect from students.
And Raja, I think I heard you say 8:30. We've been talking about 8 a.m. 8 a.m. until 10 p.m. Just for that.
Great, thank you. There's a quote in there. It says the email or the message that I sent, and it's quoted as some in-person learning experiences starting 114 with dorms 3-8. I just pulled up the letter just because I wanted to be sure I was consistent, and that's a little bit different from what I said. So I said for the 2 3-week Winterim sessions in 2021, our goal is to prioritize in-person learning if possible, and we were exploring all opportunities to have students on campus. But realistically, we hope to be in person beginning January 14th, and which allows a 14-day quarantine. And then I went on to say that we will begin Winterim as scheduled on January 14th, and a final schedule about starting in person Winterim beginning on January 4th, but a decision about potentially starting in person for January 14th will be made in late November. So didn't comment on the dorms, but certainly happy to clarify that both here and in person if needed. Dr. Willis, how does grading work for the core academic class material that occurs during Winterim? Will it be part of the spring term?
Yeah, so I don't know if you actually want to go back a couple of slides. Raja, I think Raja, you talked about this. Is that?
Yep. So this was there were some challenges here. Most of them are applicable to seniors, again, and depending on their application process and where they're at. But we are looking at sort of two grade reports, one that documents progress through November 20th, and then a second that will document, and this will look a little bit more like what you might be thinking of with a fall term report card that will indicate progress through the first 13 weeks plus Winterim on top of that. And then that will be the number or the average that will then become factored in to the spring semester average to create that year-long grade. In the case of all year-long classes, which realistically is the majority of all of our classes.
You got to mention your bird clock. Come on, you got to mention your bird clock. Otherwise, it's confusing.
A bird. I have a special place for bird watching, and I have a bird clock that always comes on at inopportune times. My apologies. But so for a year-long grade, which is ultimately what appears on a student's transcript, which is their most formal academic record, it will be just one final grade. That's an average of the fall and spring together. So that's unfortunately a little bit more confusing than it would be in a typical year, but that designation and that approach seems to support the needs of all the different constituents and places in which are just considerations that we needed to take into account.
Great, thank you. Josh, questions about transportation. Take that. Will we provide transportation, or how's that going to work? Even though I know you'll send details later, just generally.
Yeah, that will be included in the communication, and at this point, we are not planning to provide any buses to airports or major cities, and we do apologize for that, but really based on the recommendations that we have been receiving, we're trying to stay consistent, much similar to our reentry plan back in August. But if students can choose to depart campus in any type of car service, and when we do send that communication, we will have some suggested services that students have used in the past.
Great, thank you. Question, if the NEPSAC has winter sports, will Cushing be fielding teams? So I think there's some confusion about NEPSAC and the power that NEPSAC has. So the New England Preparatory School Athletic Council is really a postseason organization in terms of governance. Now they do sort of give loose guidelines on participation for regular season play and provide a venue for independent schools to play each other, but really what they control is postseason play, and they haven't come out with an announcement yet about winter sports postseason. It's up, independent schools are given that title because they are independent and do get to make their own decisions. So what guidance has been all along has been to follow the advice from your state. So we have been eagerly awaiting the report from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in Massachusetts on winter sports, which has not been released yet. That will be released in early November. I do know that, currently the fall rules do not allow basketball, for example, to be played in schools, but certainly I would anticipate an update to that coming in the next few weeks or so. So NEPSAC is not like, a little confusing, not like the NCAA where it would make a rule that's as wide sweeping as that. But any update on athletics, I can say that I'm in regular contact with a lot of boarding school heads in Massachusetts, and I don't know of a Massachusetts boarding school that has played a game against another boarding school as of yet, and I also don't know one that's scheduled or tied to a schedule for the winter. So everybody's in a wait and see mode, and I said earlier on, if other boarding schools are playing, of course Cushing will want to play as well. I think everybody has different hesitations. Some boarding schools just came back a couple of weeks ago. Others are in remote classes in their rooms and at varying levels of participation outside. It's just all over the map. So certainly when the horizon becomes very wide like that, you see examples of a lot of different operational changes throughout our schools. But haven't come across athletics occurring as of yet. I know there's some ambitious plans for the next few weeks, but I think as we see from what's happening in public health, everything's subject to change. So we're proceeding cautiously, and of course are optimistic and are always advocating for the experience of our kids. But I think as of today, we're operating no differently than any other boarding school in terms of athletics. Will the remote learning option be available if a student does not want to return in January or March, even if the state allows? So something, again, that we're talking about and we'll communicate. Certainly, right now, a student can be remote through or will be remote through January 14th. As we get closer, we'll make the determination. I would anticipate, similar to now, that a student could be remote through the Winterim. But we'll outline that in our next communication. Coordinating campus leaving, I think is a repeat question. Next question, we were told athletes would be returning in January either way and doing a remote learning in their dorms on campus. I certainly have not said that, nor has it been communicated in writing, so I apologize if you heard that elsewhere. We did say we were leaving that time flexible, and we're hoping that we could provide every opportunity possible, and we are still hoping so. So I'd be happy to have an individual conversation or review previous communications if that's needed. How about Josh and John, visits? So a couple questions about parents visiting campus.
Sure. We have developed a contactless delivery system, and I know some families, whether a birthday is coming up, a special event, or just wanting to drop off a special meal, or just as the weather's getting colder, maybe sweaters or jackets. We know that families have been really utilizing that, and that is another just touch point that families can continue to use over the next 3 or 4 weekends here on campus. And we're just going to continue to ask if that families are using that contactless touch point, that they are not driving into the middle of campus, that they are remaining masked, that students are not accessing cars or getting into cars, and as much as physical distancing can occur, we are asking that you do just continue to follow those expectations that we are setting to keep our campus healthy. If there are, starting next Saturday on October 31st, if there are any specific health reasons that a campus visit may be needed, we ask that you do either contact myself, our health services, or our counseling office, so we can have a discussion and we can assess the need of that visit, and if necessary, we can help facilitate what that would possibly look like. And so again, that would be starting next Saturday, August 31st. And if there is a need, due to any health concerns, please reach out to myself or health services or John Price, and we can help facilitate that.
And John, any additional comment you want to make on resources available in terms of mental health, or any comment you want to make?
Yeah, so for those of you who I haven't met, I'm the Director of Counseling Services here. Just as Mr. Doyen is talking about, obviously we are well aware and cognizant that even though there is a health crisis going on, it's also a mental health crisis. So counseling is available to all students and has been throughout the year, both formally and informally. The beauty of our campus, I think, is that a lot of the mental health things that I'd recommend students do here on a regular basis, getting out, connecting, playing sports, doing physical activity. But we are also available, myself and Jen Bernard, are two licensed mental health professionals on campus, along with Dr. Lister, who's our consulting psychiatrist. So those are the more formal means, but obviously there are informal counseling services. There's informal activities going on that really kind of build people's mental health and connection points. So as Mr. Doran is talking about, if there is a specific need around your child's mental health, please contact me directly, or Mr. Doran or Mrs. Bernard, and we'd be happy to assist you in that.
Great. Thank you. Next question, Winterim concludes February 12th and the spring term starts March 8th. Does that mean if everything stays semi-normal, students can go home for that period? I mean, that's our schedule at this time, and we would hope that we would be able to do that, you know, subject to change. If we're here and things are going the wrong way, perhaps, you know, we pivot and come up with something a little bit more creative to get through the spring semester. You know, I think all options are on the table during a year that hopefully is not repeated for a long, long time. But certainly our goal is to, again, you know, have in-learning experience if possible to get through that spring semester and keep everyone healthy. So while that is the plan, we may need to change that plan just as we did last spring, you know, within a couple of days and move forward. So hopefully that's not the case, but and we are planning to be on spring break during that time, but it's all subject to change. Let me go through. I thought I saw one more. There was a long, good morning from Tokyo. First of all, thank you for having the webinar about Winterim. I'd like to ask if international students can return to campus in January. It'll be the same for all students, so we're not quite sure yet. We'll communicate that at the end of November with being either remote or in person. And the next question is about quarantine. Yes, we are requiring the same as we did for the summer. So similar to what we did 2 weeks before, which is why we moved to January 14th to allow to be through the holidays and the new year, starting on the 14th with quarantine and hopefully onboarding on the 14th. But if not, we will go to the 8th. And if second part of the question is if returning to school in January is not possible, when can they return? And then, well, we would be looking at March 8th, but certainly we could reevaluate, and it could be, you know, if we need to change that for whatever reason in either direction, of course, any option would be on the table. Great. Well, it looks like we've gotten through all of the questions, and we're only about 10 minutes late. I apologize. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to Mr. Bala, Mr. Willis, Mr. Price, Mr. Doyon. Thank you to all of our faculty and staff who put a tremendous amount of work into the Winterim experience that we shared with you tonight. As I think Mr. Bala said, certainly for our teachers in the classroom, everything does take a little bit longer this year, and there's extra efforts not only for, you know, viral mitigation on campus, but also in everything they do on a daily basis. And being on campus for an in-person learning experience with your children is something that we take great pride in and want to make sure it's the best experience possible given the circumstances. And as we've said all along, trying to live within those guidelines that are put upon us and exceed them. And I think all of our, not only faculty, but faculty and staff should be commended for the hard work they put forward and will continue to over the course of the year to fulfill our mission of existing for students. I think it's just a wonderful example of how committed this group of adults is to the children here at school, whether they're here on campus or on the other side of a remote screen. So thank you. Thank you for your time tonight, everyone. Thank you to our parents. Please contact us if you have any additional questions. Happy to have one-on-one conversations, and we hope you have a good night.